When I walked into the courtroom that morning, my mother smiled and my brother looked bored. To them, this was already over. They thought I had lost. They thought I would crumble, the same way they had made me feel small my whole life. But they had no idea that this time, I wasn't walking in as their victim. I was walking in as someone who had finally found her voice. The room was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, reminding you that justice isn't always warm or fair. I could hear the faint shuffle of papers, the murmurs of strangers, and the hollow echo of my heels against the tile floor. Every step I took toward that table felt like a lifetime's worth of battles being fought all at once. Every insult, every betrayal. Every night I'd cried alone wondering how family could be so cruel. It had started years ago, after my father passed away. He was a good man, the only one who ever believed in me. When he died, he left behind his house, his business, and a small inheritance meant to be shared equally between me and my brother. At least that's what I thought. But the truth came out only later. That my mother and brother had decided my name didn't deserve to be there. They said I didn't need the money. That I was fine on my own. That my father would have wanted the business to stay in the family. As if I wasn't family. As if being independent meant I was less deserving of what he'd worked his whole life to build. I remember the day I found out. I had gone to visit the office my father built from scratch. The one that smelled faintly of coffee and oil, filled with his old tools and framed pictures of our childhood. When I walked in, everything was gone. My brother had cleared it all out, replaced every trace of our father's memory with his own logo and name. The business that was once built by love had become a monument to his greed. When I confronted them, my mother didn't even flinch. She just said, "You've always had enough. Don't be selfish." That word, selfish, burned like acid. It was the word she always used to silence me, to make me doubt my worth. For a while, I let them win. I walked away, broken but quiet. I convinced myself that peace was worth more than fighting. I worked hard, kept to myself, and built a small life of my own. But sometimes life has a way of circling back, of giving you the chance to reclaim what was taken, not out of anger, but out of justice. It happened when I met Mr. Harper, an old lawyer who had once worked with my father. He remembered me, remembered how close my father and I were. When I told him what had happened, he looked at me with disbelief and said, "Your father would never have excluded you. There's something wrong here." That night, for the first time in years, I opened the old boxes I had saved from my father's office, dusty papers, notebooks, and letters. And there, in his handwriting, was a draft of his will. My name, written clearly beside my brother's. Proof that I had been meant to inherit half of everything. My hands shook as I held that paper, not just because of what it meant legally, but because of what it meant emotionally. My father had believed in fairness. My family had believed in deceit. With Mr. Harper's help, I filed a case. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I was going up against my own blood, and worse, against years of manipulation and control. My mother tried to guilt me, calling me ungrateful. My brother mocked me, saying I was desperate for money. But it wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity, about truth. So when that courtroom day came, I stood tall, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. My mother sat with her perfect posture, wearing pearls like she was the victim of her own daughter's betrayal. My brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like he already knew the outcome. They had power, they had connections, and they thought the world revolved around their version of truth. But they didn't have evidence. I did. The proceedings felt endless. Each time my brother's lawyer spoke, twisting facts and painting me as bitter and unstable, I stayed silent, steady, waiting. Because I knew the moment that letter came out, the letter in my father's handwriting, everything would change. When Mr. Harper stood and handed it to the judge, the room fell silent. The paper looked small and fragile, yet it held the weight of a lifetime. The judge examined it, his brow furrowing as he read. Then he looked up and said the words that felt like air returning to my lungs. "This appears to be a valid original draft of the will, confirming equal inheritance to both children." My brother's smirk disappeared. My mother's smile froze, cracking at the edges like porcelain. And in that quiet second, I realized something. I didn't need to say a word. The truth spoke for itself. The ruling didn't just give me back what I was owed. It restored something far greater, my sense of worth. When the judge finalized the decision, my brother slumped back in his seat, and my mother stared at the floor. I walked past them without looking back. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Because I finally understood. You can't change people who thrive on control, but you can choose not to let them control you anymore. In the weeks that followed, I took ownership of my share of the business and sold it. I used the money to start something my father would have been proud of, a community fund that supported young women in law school, especially those who'd faced injustice. It was my quiet revenge, to turn what they meant for harm into something that created hope. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that courtroom moment. The sound of the gavel echoing, the stillness that followed. I remember how my hands stopped trembling, how the weight I'd carried for years finally lifted. That wasn't just a legal victory. It was spiritual. Because that day, I didn't just win against my mother and brother. I won against the version of myself that believed silence was safer than truth. I won against every voice that told me I didn't deserve to stand up for what was mine. And I realized something beautiful. Revenge doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes, it whispers softly in the sound of justice being served. They thought I would lose. They smiled because they believed I'd stay small, quiet, obedient. But as I walked out of that courtroom, the sunlight hit my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Not the kind that comes from money or approval,